Class society. The reformer they couldn't afford. Fedorov's dismissal through a realist lens. On Thursday, thousands of Ukrainians walked out into the streets of Kyiv, Lviv, and Odessa. They weren't protesting Russia. They were protesting their own president. The man they were marching for was 35 years old. He had never worn a uniform. 6 months earlier, he had been handed one of the most consequential jobs in a country at war, and this week, he lost it. This is a story that a lot of Western commentary is going to tell you is about innovation versus bureaucracy. A young reformer, crushed by an old guard that couldn't keep up. It's a clean story. It's also, I'd argue, the wrong one. What actually happened in Kyiv this month is a much older story than drones and Starlink jamming. It's a story about what happens when a democracy tries to fight a war for 4 straight years without ever settling the question of who is actually in charge of fighting it. Who is Mykhailo Fedorov, and why did he matter? Mykhailo Fedorov's rise is genuinely unusual, and it's worth understanding before we get to the fight that ended his tenure. He ran Volodymyr Zelensky's digital operations during the 2019 campaign. By his late 20s, he was Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, the architect of Dia, the country's e-government app, and the driving force behind the volunteer IT army that harassed Russian networks in the opening days of the invasion. In January of this year, Zelensky moved him into the Ministry of Defense. At 35, he became the youngest defense minister in Ukraine's history. And to be fair to him, he did not waste the appointment. Under his watch, the ministry pushed long-range strike drones, reportedly capable of reaching targets thousands of kilometers into Russian territory, into mass production. His ministry ran an operation aimed at severing Russian logistics lines feeding Crimea. He ordered an internal audit of defense spending that, by his own ministry's account, uncovered billions of dollars in questionable expenditure, and he moved artillery shell procurement onto an open, competitive bidding system. By most independent measures, that's a genuinely productive 6 months. A recent Kyiv International Institute of Sociology poll had him ranked among the most trusted figures in Ukrainian public life. This was not a failing minister getting quietly shuffled out. This was, by the numbers, one of the more effective people in Zelensky's cabinet, which is exactly what makes this dismissal worth taking seriously. Not as a scandal, but as a case study in something Western policymakers have been reluctant to look at directly: what unresolved civil-military tension actually costs a country at war. The 3 real fault lines. Let's set the hero narrative aside for a moment and look at what this conflict was actually about. There are 3 fault lines here, and a conservative, realist read of this situation takes all 3 seriously, including the ones that don't flatter Fedorov. Fault line 1. Command authority. Fedorov's clashes were not primarily with corrupt generals skimming money, whatever the protest signs in Kyiv might suggest. His central conflict was with Oleksandr Syrsky, the commander-in-chief, the general credited with stabilizing Ukraine's lines after 2022 and executing several of the war's more successful operations. Fedorov himself, to his credit, has publicly acknowledged this. He has said plainly that Syrsky saved our country in the early phase of the war. This was not a fight between a reformer and a saboteur. It was a fight between 2 men who had both delivered real results, disagreeing over how the next phase of the war should be fought. Fault line 2. Who controls procurement in wartime? Fedorov's push to move defense contracting through his ministry, on his ministry's terms, rather than routed through the General Staff's operational requirements, was read by military leadership, not unreasonably, as a civilian ministry attempting to set battlefield priorities without full buy-in from the people actually commanding troops. Transparency and competitive bidding are good things. But in a war economy, who controls the purchasing pipeline is also a question of who controls strategy. That is not a small thing to fight over, and it's not obviously a fight where the civilian side is automatically in the right. Fault line 3. The limits of technocratic government in wartime. Fedorov is, by background and temperament, a builder of apps and platforms, genuinely talented at it. But drones do not replace infantry, logistics, or the unglamorous work of holding a front line for 4 years. There is a recurring pattern in wartime democracies where a talented technocrat, popular with the public and the international press, comes to believe that popularity and technical competence should translate directly into command authority over people who have spent their careers in uniform. Sometimes that instinct is right. Often, it produces exactly the kind of institutional standoff Kyiv just went through. Zelensky, for his part, did not hide from any of this. At a press conference alongside UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he confirmed that tensions between the 2 men had grown so severe that Fedorov and Syrsky were, by that point, only cooperating when the president personally mediated between them. That is not a sustainable arrangement in a country fighting for its survival. Something had to give, and the president chose the man in uniform. The historical parallel American audiences will recognize. If this feels familiar, it should. American history has its own version of this exact fight. In 1951, President Truman relieved General Douglas MacArthur of command in Korea. MacArthur was, by any measure, wildly popular, a war hero with a public following that dwarfed the president's own approval ratings at the time. But Truman removed him anyway, over a fundamental disagreement about strategy and, more importantly, over who holds final authority in a war, the elected government, or the individual who happens to be winning the public relations battle. Truman's approval collapsed in the aftermath. History, however, has been considerably kinder to that decision than the polling was in the moment, because the alternative, a war effort where popular acclaim substitutes for a clear chain of command, is corrosive over the long run, no matter how talented the popular figure is. Zelensky's decision this month is not a perfect mirror of that moment, but the underlying logic rhymes. He chose institutional continuity in his military command over a reformer with real achievements and real public support. From a realist standpoint, the standpoint that cares less about who has the better TikTok narrative and more about who wins a grinding, multi-year war, that is a defensible call, even if it is not a costless one. What this means for Western support. This is where it actually matters for people outside Ukraine, including everyone watching this who has an opinion about how their own government's aid dollars are being spent. Western governments have, so far, largely stayed publicly neutral, calling this an internal Ukrainian matter, which, formally, it is. But NATO military planners have consistently prioritized one thing above almost everything else in this war: the stability and predictability of Ukraine's command structure. That is not a small preference. Alliance coordination, intelligence sharing, and joint planning all depend on knowing who is actually making decisions on the Ukrainian side, and on that person staying in place long enough for plans to be executed. A defense ministry that reshuffles every 6 to 12 months. And this is now the second high-profile removal at the top of Ukraine's defense establishment in under 2 years, after Valery Zelensky's dismissal as commander-in-chief in 2024, is, frankly, a harder ally to plan around, regardless of how talented any individual minister is. None of that makes the protesters in Kyiv wrong to be angry, and it doesn't erase what Fedorov actually built. But for anyone assessing this from a hard-nosed, strategic interest point of view, the question isn't who is the more sympathetic figure. It's which arrangement gives Ukraine's war effort, and by extension, the alliance backing it, the most stable footing going into year 5. On that narrower question, continuity of military command has a stronger claim than continuity of any one reformist minister, however impressive his 6 months in office. Mykhailo Fedorov is not going away. He has said as much himself, and a public trust rating like his doesn't simply evaporate because a cabinet post changes hands. He may well be back in government, in some form, before this war ends. But the lesson worth taking from this week isn't Ukraine fired its best minister. It's that a country cannot fight a war of this length and intensity while leaving the basic question of civilian versus military authority unresolved at the top. Sooner or later, someone has to actually decide who is in charge, and when that decision finally comes, it will always look, to someone, like a betrayal of the person who deserved to win. That's it for this one. If you want to see how this same event looks completely different depending on which country is telling the story, that's exactly what the rest of this series is for. End.